y'all.
Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Danielle Crittenden, and filling in for Christina, who's away this week again with her ailing mother in Portland, will be our good friend, the Wall Street Journal's Meghan Cox Gurdon. Before we start, though, I wanted to add a preface to this episode, which was in fact recorded last Thursday, before Saturday's horrific shooting at the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue, the largest anti-Semitic attack in American history. Our guest this episode is Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action, the largest grassroots gun control organization in the country. And the approach that she and her fellow volunteers take to the issue is unique. The group does not challenge or is against the Second Amendment, and the policies it advocates are supported by the vast majority of gun owners and non-gun owners alike. But specifically, we wanted to have Shannon on to discuss the issues of guns and women and guns in schools. Do guns keep women safer? Would it help to arm teachers? And other questions swirling about this debate. Saturday's murders have only added to the sense of urgency, sadness, anger, and indeed sense of hopelessness and powerlessness that so many of us feel in the wake of these tragedies. Christina and I both sent our children to Jewish day schools here in Washington, D.C., and non-Jewish parents, I found, were always startled to learn about routine security measures that were in place, even in the nursery school. Parking lots were fortified. There were privacy screens around the outdoor playgrounds. No door was ever left unlocked, and even simply dropping off a forgotten lunch required elaborate buzzing in by a guard. All street-facing windows and glass were bulletproof. And at the synagogue our family attends, doors are locked at all times, and off-duty police officers are always present for Shabbat and holiday services. I used to wonder if these measures were excessive or sent a depressing message to our children that they were uniquely in danger and targeted in our otherwise tolerant and free society. After all, their Christian friends didn't have to pass through metal detectors to pray or be protected by bulletproof glass while they studied. But I don't wonder anymore. In any case, our following discussion with Shannon should make us all feel less hopeless and helpless. There's something important every single one of us can do, and that's vote next week. Let me now bring on Meghan and start the show we recorded before this most recent senseless tragedy took place. And let's consider what more we can do to protect this country than just keeping the victims of yet another gun massacre in our thoughts and prayers.
עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ויאמרו אמן.
Meghan, it's so great of you to be back co-splaining. The only problem is that you are injured.
Oh, I'm operating on 9 digits rather than the usual 10.
Yes, your hand is in a cast.
Yeah, I've learned in the last couple of weeks just how important the opposable thumb is for general humanoid activities. You can't
kind of separates us from beast.
It pretty much does. I would be no good at living in the trees with this thing either. No, it's quite extraordinary. I sort of typing with 9 fingers, and it turns out that my right thumb is in fact the most important part of my body. And I had all this time I had no idea.
You have to be off social media now. How do you swipe left or right?
You can't swipe at all. What you do is you paw frantically at the keyboard with your left hand, and it's really exasperating.
Well, just out of solidarity, when I was opening your wine,
which I couldn't do for myself,
even though I asked you to until you pointed out you only had one hand, I sliced my thumb open. So I've now got a big tea towel wrapped around my thumb.
So we're
in solidarity here, like fist bump.
Femsplaining with 2 thumbs operable between us.
We're going to talk about guns, which no one wants to talk about, right?
Really not a favorite topic at all.
It's like I could just say let's talk about abortion, right?
Yeah.
This is going to be an episode on abortion.
That actually would be easier for me to talk about than this one. When you said to me, come and femsplain and we'll talk about guns, I thought, wait, I have a sudden emergency headache. I can't possibly come. But anyway, she's dragooned me, so I'm here.
Well, Christina didn't want to talk about it either. And why don't we want to talk about guns?
Oh, it is an issue akin to abortion, and people feel very hot under the collar about it and very righteous about it, I think, on all sorts of different angles of it. And it's also one of those topics that, actually Social Security used to be the third rail of politics. Perhaps it still is. But it's one of those topics in which almost no matter what anecdote or personal experience or insight or reading you do on it, anything that you say or think about it seems to fall naturally, instantly into a groove, and then just travel along that groove. And if you think this, then you must think that. And these grooves that somehow move us into, I don't know that they move us into tribes, but there is this sense in which there's no way fresh to approach the topic.
Right. It's a move. Everybody's mind is made up. It seems one way or the other. And then you get some horrific event, and then you get all upset.
You get emotional responses, which are sometimes a good guide to things, but your feelings aren't always a good guide to what's right.
Right. So to bring it a more original angle, because this is the point about coming to the femsplainers. We're trying not to do everything as you would just see on TV with left and right and people shouting at each other. Yeah. That's why we drink. I was very fascinated with two things. First of all, the question of women and guns and children, not just child students with guns, but also guns in the houses of kids. Does it make you more safe? We have a kind of, I think, general belief that if you're a woman with a gun, it's, the great equalizer, you're safer, it's good to have in the house.
Sure, it also depends entirely on your context. If you're minding your own business and somebody bursts in on you.
Right.
That's one thing. If you are nervously making your way to your car in a darkened parking garage and you are equipped, it could be another. Sorry, that might be getting too fast.
No, but that's right. But so sort of how beneficial are guns to women, basically? Right. But really the catalyst to do this topic is this woman named Shannon Watts, who we're going to bring on. Okay. This is probably the wrong phrasing, but she's a pistol. She's a mom. I think she has 4 kids. We'll
no, I think she has 5. So she's joined the right.
She's like you.
Right club.
Yes, you're a moms of 5. Yeah. She's the founder of Mums Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Mm-hmm. What is interesting about her is she doesn't come at this topic in a sort of knee-jerk, typical way. Not to say that people on any side are being knee-jerk, but it is a different perspective. Mm-hmm. Her story is interesting, that she decided after Sandy Hook to just do something. She had nothing to do with Sandy Hook. That sounds wrong. No. Yeah. No, but she like many of us was horrified. And decided to do something. So she formed this group, and as I understand it, she's taking the approach the way Mothers Against Drunk Driving did, understanding that this is a topic, we've seen the impossibility of getting legislation through, laws changed. So could you make it a social issue? Could you, pretty much like the way we did with seatbelts and smoking, and not drunk driving.
And teaching Americans to brush their teeth, which they didn't do with toothbrushes and toothpaste until after the war. It's a true fact. Actually, it was one of
the English still don't.
Calumny. Take that back. My husband's English.
I didn't want to say anything. So, can we tackle the gun issue, as it were, through social pressure?
Yeah. Changing hearts, right? And then changing minds?
Well, maybe. But one of the questions that arose when I was researching this and looking at some of the work that Shannon has done is, you ask, before your child goes on a play date with someone, you ask about that person's guns in the house.
What? Wait, you're suggesting this as a thing that we should do?
She's suggesting is a thing we should do, and it feels weird. But think about it.
Think about
the gun deaths that happen accidentally.
Right.
And so given sort of the greater prevalence of guns in our culture, and we'll talk about that too.
Right.
Why wouldn't you sort of, I mean, I find it like awkward to say like, my child has allergies, so please don't have any peanuts on hand. And by the way, how many guns do you own? I mean, it's...
So presumably she's suggesting that, well, I guess we can ask her, but as an awkward question that therefore puts the onus and the embarrassment on the host, who then thinks, wait a minute, perhaps I should be considering this question.
Right.
I'll tell you, I was asked that question once, and it made me furious. It was when, briefly, for our health care, we were going to a teaching hospital. It was just an insurance thing, but you could spend all day while one person after another came in and asked you the same set of questions. And I was asked repeatedly, do you have a gun in the home? And it felt so intrusive. It was like, my first response was, of course not. Because it seemed almost insulting to be asked that. And then I got steamed because I thought, no, that's not right either. If I did, what damn business is it of yours? I'm sure they were just collecting information. Or maybe they wanted to give me a little lecture about how I shouldn't co-sleep with my baby and I shouldn't have a weapon on my premises. It seemed to me a transgression over the bounds of privacy.
Right.
Sorry.
But as we'll, I think, discover with some of the statistics, it's not a crazy thing now either to ask. Well, I put the question, do you believe women who own guns are safer than those who don't, to our social media. And I just discovered Twitter and Instagram, you can do polls, which is great. And I don't know, I mean, these are obviously not scientific. They reflect our listeners. But I was interested that on Twitter, 66% said yes versus 34% said no. And on Instagram, 70% said yes versus 30% who said no. And Instagram usually skews females.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting. But
well, this may turn out to be one of those issues that actually, if you scratch a little bit beneath the surface, it's not so obvious as you might think. It's we all of us are operating in the world. We feel vulnerable sometimes. We have ideas about our constitutional rights. We have, great grief and sorrow. What's happening in the schools with kids? There's a lot whirling around.
So, Meg, tell me, just before we go into this with Shannon, give me just a sense of where you stand. What is you probably haven't thought like academically about this problem.
Oh, certainly not.
But where you sort of stand and a little bit about your upbringing, because when we were talking about it in advance of you coming on, you grew up in rural Maine. You had friends who went deer hunting. And I think you have relatives you mentioned who live near Newton or in...
Oh, Newtown.
Newtown, yeah.
Oh, God, yeah. I have okay, well, just start with Newtown. Like everyone, I heard that day that something horrible had happened in Connecticut. And I remember standing up in my office and saying, well, at least it couldn't possibly be Newtown, because it was like Shangri-La to me growing up. I have divorced parents. Both of them are wonderful, but there was a divorce and there was some sadness in my childhood. And my aunt and uncle lived in Newtown. And that's where I would go. And that was the household where I went, where I felt just kind of bathed in happiness and normalcy. I have two cousins who grew up in that household. It's a beautiful little town, an exquisite New England town. There was an added dimension of surreality to the horror for me, because it was a place that I would associate with some of the happiest and sort of safest times of my life. So that's that. The second part of this is, okay, background-wise, I would say my mom is very anti-gun, has always felt very leery of them. My father is a gun owner, but he's a gun owner because his father before him was a gun owner. And so he has my grandfather's old pistol, his army pistol, and there's a shotgun of some sort. And we used to live in the woods. So we also, you sometimes needed, if you had a rabid animal or, you needed to be equipped to prepare yourself and your property if something was coming at you. The only time I remember my father using the gun with intent was one morning when I woke up to the sound of gunshots coming from the field beside our house. And I went outside and found my father executing a faulty alarm clock by firing it. He was so furious at the damn thing. He thought, and he just took it out and killed it. It was one of those.
Did he hit it like with?
Oh yeah, he had good aim. Anyway, so the long and the short of it is that I think I'm probably like a lot of Americans. I have a mixed view of the conundrum of guns. I've seen people use them perfectly efficiently to do for the purposes that they use them, like taking down a deer or scaring varmints or whatever, and executing alarm clocks.
Varmints.
Varmints. At the same time, I'm a mother of 5 kids who go to school every day, and the idea of some nutter taking a gun to one of those properties and letting fly is horrifying to me as it is to any other mother. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated. I feel as though I have, like Walt Whitman, I contain multitudes on this topic.
Well, I think there's a romance of the gun, and then there's the kind of reality of the modern day gun. And, I know listeners are going to rag on me because I'm from Canada. And we, Canadians are very smug and maybe rightly so on there. Well, about so many things.
I just want to say, let the record show.
So many things, but especially on gun ownership. But I grew up in a family. I grew up in a city, Toronto. But my stepfather, who I lived with, was a soldier. And his father was not only a soldier, but the father of the Canadian Armored Corps.
Oh, my.
And he had shotguns in the basement, right. And he also had a framed revolver in his study that had belonged to his father, I think from World War I. And what I remember growing up, and he'd been in a lot of, not only my dad served in World War II in Korea, but he then was a foreign correspondent, so he was in a lot of war zones. So what I remember was that there is a kind of, soldiers don't romance the gun, It's like a tool. It's like their equivalent of a, buzzsaw or something. There's no romance to it. They're very reverent about its danger.
They're very serious.
It's very serious. I remember from a very early age of him teaching us, not that we ever used the shotgun, but it was in the house. He always kept it, the ammunition locked away and things. But he taught us how to be around a gun and how to hold it and things you don't do. And he had very little time for people who would be like, soldier of fortune types, mad gun collectors, people who found masculinity in their guns. Like, this was just not something that he would have admired. Like, his identity was not in the gun. And I think that's one of the interesting things about the United States. I was looking through some of the data and the Pew polls that show one of the biggest factors of people who own guns, why they say they own them, is for identity issues.
Oh, I get that.
Yeah, but it's like it's an American thing. It's an identity thing. It's this freedom thing.
It's a sovereign individual thing as well.
Right.
It means I can look after myself and my family. I mean, that's a real feeling. That's not the triviality or something
right, but it's not
in the 19th century.
It's not that my dad wouldn't feel that. It's just me because we have the RCMP.
Oh, hey, you guys
and the Queen's own, right? But I think there's that sense of the only time that the gun was ever used was, or there was an altercation with a gun, was when some people who had done drywalling in the house had seen the framed gun in my dad's study, and they came back to steal it. Oh, God. And I was alone in the house.
I hope you were armed at the time.
No. It's actually sort of funny and embarrassing. I had my parents' 2 Jack Russells, and I was sitting in the living room, and I had, I was eating crackers or something, and I was talking to the dogs, as one does.
Of course. Guys, want a cracker?
Yeah, I was going like, "Hi, Felix, doesn't this look really good?" And they heard me. They came in through the kitchen. They were going to beeline for the study to take the gun. Instead, they thought I was with someone because I was talking to the dogs. So they bolted out of there, but they took my purse. But then, you go into the kitchen like, where's my purse? It was really strange. And then they took my keys to my apartment. They robbed my apartment. But the point was the gun had attracted them back to rob us.
Right.
But in terms of defending me, it was completely useless. So,
just out of curiosity, how did you know it was the gun that they wanted?
Because they confessed. They were caught.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only other time my mom kept a shotgun in our cottage in the country, Pete told her how to use it. And when they got robbed, it got stolen. So we don't have a good history of actually using our guns to defend ourselves. But
it is interesting that you have criminals coming to steal a gun. Because that's an aspect of this. I don't suppose your criminal class is answering the Pew surveys on this stuff. I did wonder when I looked at the data.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to provide for the number of illegal guns,
right.
which are,
what
I believe numerous is an understatement.
Right. All right. Well, I'm very excited to have Shannon on, and we can explore this more. So let's bring her on. Shannon Watts.
I was 5 and he was 6. We rode on horses made of sticks. He wore black and I wore white. He would always win the fight. Bang, bang. He shot me down. Bang, bang. I hit the ground. Bang, bang. that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down.
So Shannon, welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you on. You founded this group in reaction to Sandy Hook, but not as is usual, I guess, in these situations where something awful happens to you and then you become an advocate. You became an advocate in reaction to the stupefying horror of Sandy Hook, but you decided that you just needed to do something, and you did this on Facebook. Is that right?
That's right. And, living in America, even though I hadn't had any friends or family injured or killed by gun violence, we all witnessed this in our everyday lives. And, I can remember being a college student in Texas in the early 90s when one of the first public mass shootings happened at something called Luby's Cafeteria. And it was really just sort of living through mass shooting after mass shooting. I was a young mom when Columbine happened. I was a working mom when Virginia Tech happened. I always had all these reasons for not getting involved. And then what really impacted me so deeply was after the shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, I was certain her colleagues would do something. And as we all know, they did nothing. And so when Sandy Hook happened, as the mom of 5, and at that time they ranged in age from elementary school all the way through college, I suddenly realized that my own kids weren't safe, right? Not realizing that nearly 100 Americans are shot and killed every day, regardless of mass shootings, but that's really when it hit home for me. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to join Mothers Against Drunk Driving for Gun Safety. I'm just going to get online and I'll join that. And that's how this issue impacted me as a mom. And I couldn't find anything. I spent an hour or two online. And so I thought, I'm just going to start a Facebook page. And to be clear, I had 75 Facebook friends at the time. I did not have a Twitter handle. I really was not a sophisticated social media user. But what was amazing was the power of social media, because so quickly I was connected to women all over the country who had the exact same idea that day, which was that it was time to get off the sidelines. And as we all know with type A women, they very quickly began to organize where they lived. And what was an online conversation became this huge, rapidly growing offline movement. It'll be 6 years that we've been doing this coming December. We're not only the largest grassroots movement in the country, we're one of the largest grassroots organizations nationwide. We have hundreds of thousands of active volunteers, we have millions of supporters, and we have a presence in every single state. And really that's the story, is that women are organizing around this issue and they're winning.
What was the appeal of the Mothers Against Drunk Driving? That's what you said when you first started searching. That's an interesting way to go about it. Why wouldn't you just jump on one of the other, well-established gun control groups? What was it that made you think about Mothers Against Drunk Driving?
Well, I just remember that being such an incredibly effective organization, especially in the 80s when I was becoming a teenager, and how impactful that organization was not only on me but on culture, and the success they had of changing the culture around drunk driving, of changing the laws, and in many ways because they were using the power of being a woman, of being a mom. And I saw organizations online. I saw a lot of Washington, D.C. think tanks. I saw individual state organizations, the vast majority of which were run by men. And that's just not, I wanted to be a part of a grassroots army of women who were fighting this issue using their voices and their votes. And when you look at sort of where does the power live in this country for women, it's certainly not in Congress or in state legislatures. It's not leading Fortune 1,000 companies, but it is in organizing, and it always has been, right, from the very beginning of America, from Prohibition up to the Flint water crisis in Michigan. Mm-hmm. Women often take the lead on these social issues and are able to make it a real difference.
Well, I'm gonna dispute you on the question that women have no representation in Congress. I mean, we have the franchise; we can vote just like men. So I don't think that's a fair aspect.
I mean that we're only 20% of the congressional seats.
Right. Well, okay, but I mean, not all women think alike. And actually, one of the things I was really interested in when I saw some of the work that you've done and the presentations that you've made, I'm really interested in how you are thinking about this issue of crossing, I don't want to even say crossing the partisan lines. It's more the question with, before you came on with us, Shannon, Danielle and I were talking about the difficulty with the gun issue for a lot of people. It's like the difficulty with the question of abortion, certain other kind of third rail topics, is that almost anything anyone says somehow drops you into a groove and then you somehow have to travel along that groove. And that everyone can, it's very difficult to bring a fresh approach to this topic. And I have, great respect for what you're doing, and I sense that you probably have a good answer to this. I mean, how do you take this issue, which when kids are killed in mass shootings, nobody asks them what their politics are, right? I mean,
sure.
Kids are just getting killed. How do you then reach out in a respectful way to people who have a different point of view on, let's say, the question of gun control? I really want us to have a fresh discussion about these topics. So I will stop talking now. You tell me. What do you think? How do you make this fresh?
Well, I think what makes this issue different than many social issues, including abortion, is that when you look at polling, the data shows us that the vast majority of Americans actually support stronger gun laws like background checks. They support red flag laws. They support disarming domestic abusers. It gets less when you talk about an assault weapons ban, but still it's the majority of Americans who support those kinds of measures. When you look at gun owners, and please keep in mind that only 1 in 10 gun owners actually belongs to the NRA, about 80% of gun owners also support those laws. And even polling done by Republican pollster Frank Luntz shows that about 74% of NRA members, of which there are a few million, support these laws as well. And so what we're dealing with is an issue where it is polarizing. Certain conversations are certainly polarizing, and there is a very vocal minority who has been and is outspoken on this issue. But when it comes right down to it, it isn't necessarily Republicans versus Democrats in the general population. It isn't even gun owners versus non-gun owners. It really becomes an issue of Americans versus lawmakers, too many lawmakers who have for decades been beholden to the gun lobby, right? So we're seeing that grip loosen, but until it does, that's why we have, I think, such polarizing conversations, is because of the gun lobby's rhetoric. And it's just important to remember that this is an issue that most Americans agree on. And when you look at it from that lens and that perspective, it becomes frustrating that lawmakers aren't doing what their constituents want them to do.
Well, that's true what you say, that I was struck when I was going through the research that there is actually a consensus between, let's not even call it Republicans and Democrats because that exists too, but gun owners and non-gun owners, that they do favor limiting access to guns for people with mental illnesses or who are on a federal no-fly list or watch list, things that you would kind of accept or take for granted. But even these very basic things seem to be not stuff we can enforce, not, as you point out, that lawmakers are willing to consider. And I want to take this back then to your Mothers Against Drunk Driving analogy. I mean, if we're feeling we can't enact these through laws or through our lawmakers, do we do this socially? Do we do it the way we did seatbelts and smoking? And drunk driving, of course?
I think it's an incredibly important point. So a couple things I'll say is, first of all, our organization is nonpartisan. Obviously, Democrats have been leading the charge on this as opposed to Republicans, but we're seeing that change. We don't call for any solution that is not backed up by data to actually work. There's certainly organizations that are to the left and to the right of us, but we really try very hard to be nonpartisan and be focused on data-driven solutions as opposed to a lot of what the gun lobby talks about, which is anecdotal. The other thing that's important to know is that at the state level, we actually are making great strides. Everyone is hoping for this cathartic moment in Congress, which I do believe will come in my lifetime. But much like different social movements, we've gone to states and legislatures there to make significant changes. So since I started this organization, we've helped close the background check loophole that allows unlicensed gun sales without a background check in 10 states, bringing the total to 20 that now require that. We've passed laws that disarm domestic abusers in 28 states. We've passed red flag laws and banned bump stocks. And this year, in large part because of the tragedy in Parkland, Florida, was the most successful year we've ever had in passing state laws. We were able to pass stronger gun laws in 19 states. 9 of those laws were signed by Republican governors. And we are starting to see that this is no longer the third rail of politics, especially for Republican governors, which I think is an incredibly good sign. But that's not the only work we do, and that goes back to your point about culture. You know, something a lot of people don't realize is that 4.5 million children in this country live in homes with unsecured guns. And gun owners, when polled, say they do believe gun owners should be held accountable legally through laws for not responsibly storing their firearms. The NRA disagrees. They fight us in every city and state when we try to pass policies or laws that would require gun owners to responsibly store their firearms. And so we have started a program called Be Smart, which is a very non-polarizing way to discuss gun ownership. And we partner with the PTA, and we have what we call house parties, where we go and we have discussions about how do you responsibly store your firearms. But the other piece of this is also the role that companies can play. So we believe that when lawmakers do not listen to their constituents, that we can make companies listen to their customers. And it started back with us in 2013 when we were able to get Starbucks to disallow the open carry of firearms in their stores. And since then,
how do you do that, Shannon? Because presumably, you know, that's a law in your, you know, municipality that you can do.
Yep.
How can you ban it as a Starbucks?
So 45 states allow something called open carry, where you can, in some cases, take your loaded AR-15 in public, walk around, or go into stores. Stores have the right to prohibit firearms on their property. And the reason that we started with Starbucks was because they publicly announced that they would no longer allow smoking 20 feet outside their stores, regardless of state law. So I called and I said, are you still going to allow open carry? Because as a mom, I'm much more worried about secondhand bullets than secondhand smoke. Right. And they said, yes, they would still follow state law. And so we embarked on this, something we called Skip Starbucks Saturday. And we also made pictures of open carry inside Starbucks go viral. And within 3 months, the CEO came out on television and said, guns are no longer welcome in our stores.
Please join the Femsplainers.
Yes, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or your favorite podcast hangout.
And follow us on Instagram at the Femsplainer Podcast.
And find the Femsplainers on Facebook and Twitter at Femsplainers.
And learn all about us at femsplainers.com. Thank you.
Yeah, Femsplainer. We're talking to Shannon Watts of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Can you be charged with negligence? We see often that, you know, a lot of stories of toddlers shooting toddlers.
Yes.
That's horrifying. Yeah. A gun is unsecured and one of them gets it. And it's not just something that can happen to your own child. Right. Meghan and I were talking about this before you came on about, are we willing as mothers to say to other mothers, do you have a gun and is it secured in your home? That's not a question that we ask each other right now. And it seems actually super awkward to ask, but maybe it shouldn't be. Can you be held negligent if, in any state at this point, if you have an unsecured gun and something happens? A kid hurts themselves, a kid shoots another?
Yeah, it's an incredibly important question, and that's part of our Be Smart program. We talk to parents and explain how you can ask. It's no different than talking about allergies or the fact that you don't want your children to watch, you know, R-rated movies or play M-rated video games, or ask about how the swimming pool is secured. It's very important to ask if there are guns in the home and how they're stored, regardless of how awkward a question it is. And I can tell you that I have talked to many parents whose children were shot and killed at sleepovers or parties who say it was the one question they did not ask. Right. In 28 states in this country, there are laws that require adults, gun owners, to responsibly store their firearms, which means locked, unloaded, separate from ammunition when children are around, and that the law does punish them if the guns are not stored correctly and a minor gets a gun and injures themselves or others. But keep in mind, we're talking about misdemeanors in almost every case with about a $400 fine. Mm-hmm. The strongest gun laws around safe storage, believe it or not, in this country are in Florida, and data shows that they do work. But it is very similar to the 1980s when someone would get in their car, drive drunk, kill their family, and people would say, what a horrible tragedy. We can't punish them. They've suffered enough. And Mothers Against Drunk Driving came along and said, wait a minute, laws are the underpinning of the morality of our society, and if we don't have a law against this, it will continue to happen. And that's where we are right now with guns. In Colorado, if I left a loaded gun on my kitchen counter, my son got it and shot himself or someone else, I would probably pay a $400 fine.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, God, that's horrible. I'm interested. How do you find this? How do people respond? I mean, are the people who you're, putting through the Be Smart program, are they, is that generally like-minded parents? Are you moving out into more maybe resistant environments?
Yeah, I mean, that is where we start in many of our reddest areas where we have Moms Demand Action volunteers, because it is a non-polarizing conversation, and because there are many people who are interested in finding out more about that. We have many volunteers who ask their family members or their children's friends' parents about guns and are shocked to learn that, yes, they have loaded guns stored in shoeboxes under a bed in the guest bedroom. And you don't know unless you ask. And, I can tell you from my own experience, my ex-husband is a gun owner, and I just thought one day when my son, who's a teenager, was having sort of a tough day, I thought I better just check on that and ask my ex-husband again, I know you have a hunting rifle, but how's everything stored? And when I asked him the question, I did realize that his guns were not safely stored. Mm-hmm. And he agreed, he went and got gun safes at Dick's and stored them correctly. But it is such an important conversation to have, and I think it's incredibly important where you are in a culture of gun ownership. And look, the gun lobby has spent decades telling gun owners, keep your guns loaded, keep them nearby, because you are always at risk.
Well, I love this idea that it didn't occur to your ex-husband. Think of what, houseproofing we do when we have toddlers. We're worried they're going to get into the tide or something, and we put all these little, locks on our cabinets, and yet you have a gun loosely lying around. In fact, to your point, Shannon, according to this most recent Pew research in 2017, it says roughly 4 in 10 gun owners, or 38%, say there is a gun that is both loaded and easily accessible to them all of the time when they're at home. And men are especially likely to have a loaded gun at the ready. That's a little scary, although, shoebox is obviously safe. Just put some tape on it.
Look there.
Nobody would possibly look in the shoebox under the bed.
It does come from this culture of, the way the NRA sells guns, particularly now that there's a president in place who no one is afraid is going to take their guns away. They have to sort of create this culture where we're afraid of one another. And the way they do that is to foment fear around mobs and civil war and all these different things, that there's always a boogeyman behind every tree. And that does make some gun owners feel that they have to have a gun with them at all times, ready to defend themselves. And, the data shows that's not necessarily true, but it is part of American culture and has been for a long time. And then when you don't have laws that sort of underpin these fears, you have a recipe for disaster.
It is really interesting, isn't it, when you think about how bifurcated we are as a culture with guns, which are glamorized and valorized on television and, on film. I mean, since forever. I mean, certainly we have the lovely lone, like the image of the stoic Westerner who kind of, the law.
The woman with a baby on one hip and a gun on the other.
Packing mama, yeah. But there's that, but there's also, our kind of fetish for crime dramas and police dramas and things like that, and shootouts and whatever. Point is, like, we do live in this culture that is enamored of the gun, and at the same time, obviously we have the horrific toll of real life gun violence, and it's a problematic thing in terms of making sense of where we actually are. And just speaking to that, Danielle, I wanted your perspective on this, because you think of countries like Canada, the United States, and Australia, which were, when they were settled by Europeans, it was a lonely, dangerous world out there. And yet we have very different national identities when it comes to weaponry, right? We Americans have guns at the center of our culture. I mean, we certainly do in our kind of, media culture. And as Shannon would maybe say, in our physical culture. Australia, not the same thing. Canada, not the same thing.
You mean in terms of like mass shootings and...
Well, no, also just to this kind of identity that is connected to the sovereign individual who can protect him or herself and their family,
Right. No, Shannon, before you came on, we were sort of marveling, and I'm from Canada, which I'm now boring our listeners with saying repeatedly. But what another thing I was struck by the research was how much Americans view a gun as part of their identity and a symbol of freedom. I think maybe this underlies with other cultures, like whatever, Canada does in its laws. I know Australia had a change of its laws after they had, one mass shooting too many, as it were. But Americans really do seem to connect freedom and being an American to their gun ownership, or at least a certain large part of them do.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, back to this idea of our culture versus other cultures. Japan, for example, they play more video games and invest more money in video games than Americans do. And yet America has this horrific crisis with gun violence. We actually watch the same movies, we play the same video games, we have the same rates of mental illness, and yet you are 25 times more likely to be shot and killed in America than you are in other high-income countries. And the bottom line, the reason for that is that we have easy access to guns.
Yeah.
The other thing that we have in America that no other developed nation has is an incredibly powerful gun lobby. And the NRA has been basically a lobbying organization, not a hunting and fishermen's organization, since the mid-1970s. And they have spent hundreds of millions of dollars to inculcate Americans to believe that there should be guns everywhere, anytime, for anyone, no questions asked. And the return on their investment is a society that is very connected to firearms in a different way than any other nation.
You've reminded me of something. I don't know. I hope this statistic, it's a horrible statistic that I heard years ago, which was that girls attempt suicide at much greater rates than boys, but boys succeed at much greater rates than girls because boys use guns.
Suicide rates have been going up both between boys and girls, and very dramatically. But yes, boys tend to take the more, as you would imagine, the more violent way out.
We have about the same rate of suicide attempts in this country as other high-income countries, yet we have a much higher fatality rate. And that's because the majority of suicide attempts in America are with firearms. And about 2/3 of the 33,000 gun deaths in this country every single year are suicide.
One of the questions that we really wanted to explore with you, and I said to Meghan, so again, I'm repeating myself, but we put this out over our social media polls. The question was, do you believe women who own guns are safer than those who don't? The majority on every social platform of our listeners was yes, they think they're safer. So let's talk to that question. Are women safer having guns in their house?
The data would tell us no, but part of the problem in America is that we don't have enough or recent data, and that's because the NRA was able to get Congress to quash much government funding on gun violence in this country. So in many ways, we don't know how significant our problem is or how best to solve it. And the reason for that was because the CDC came out with a study in the 90s that basically said you are much more likely to be killed with your own gun or having someone else use your gun to kill you than you are to defend yourself. And we also know that when there is a gun in the home of a woman where there's an abusive situation, she's actually 5 times more likely to be shot and killed with that gun. So data points to people actually not being safer with guns in their home. That said, we are not opposed to gun ownership for protection or self-defense. If someone makes that choice, that's their choice to make. We have the Second Amendment. Our issue comes with the need to restore the responsibilities that go along with gun rights. And that includes a background check on every gun sale, and that's not happening in this country. That includes making sure that domestic abusers don't have easy access to guns. It means that police and families have the right to petition a court to temporarily disarm someone who seems to be a danger to themselves or others. And these are all things that the gun lobby fights us on in every state legislature across the country. So data would show that a gun does not make you safer, but the issue is your gun making me less safe?
So I wonder, I feel as though there's often, there's so many, I don't want to find myself stuck in one of those grooves and repeating somebody else's talking points. So forgive me, anyone, if I seem to. I wonder, some of the measures that you're describing, they certainly make perfect sense. The idea of a background check seems eminently sensible. Would any of these measures, like, moms and dads securing their weapons, whatever, would those have diverted any of the most horrific recent tragedies? Would it have stopped the boy in Parkland or that man in Las Vegas?
Sandy Hook, that mother had an arsenal of weapons.
Right. We can agree maybe that some, when I say we, I don't mean myself. I mean, as a country, we can agree to certain, measures. But and they may make us feel very good, and they may advance the ball in the direction that, you and the women in your organization want it to go. But does it actually touch the problem?
Yes, and it depends on the law that you're talking about. So, for example, in Las Vegas, we oppose bump stocks. It's certainly very difficult to shoot and injure 500 people and kill, dozens when you don't have bump stocks that you turn your semi-automatic rifle into essentially a machine gun. We also know that most of the mass shootings in this country start because of domestic violence, and that if we're able to disarm domestic abusers, we can disrupt mass shootings in this country.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could I stop you on that just for a sec? I'm really trying to understand. So when I think of mass shootings, I'm thinking of Sandy Hook, for instance, and I'm also thinking of Parkland. Was there a domestic abuse dimension to either of those cases?
Well, if you look at Sutherland Springs, there is. For example, so when you do look at a mass shooting, it's defined as 4 people who are shot and killed, not including the shooter. So it's not necessarily a Parkland or a Sandy Hook, but it's the regular mass shootings that happen in this country on a daily basis. And the majority of those are instigated by domestic violence. When you look at the Parkland shooting, that shooting was committed by a 17-year-old who was allowed to buy a semi-automatic rifle. We also believe that the age to do that is 21. So if you look at each mass shooting in this country individually, some laws will stop them. Some are more about the culture. But that goes back to your point, which earlier was when we were able to significantly reduce the amount of automobile fatalities in this country, it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just adjusting the speed limit. It was also speed bumps. It was also seatbelts. It was also more safe cars. It was drunk driving laws. There were a whole variety of things that went into reducing automobile fatalities. In this country, we have not even trying when it comes to gun laws. And so every time there is a mass shooting, you hear pundits say things like, well, what law would have stopped that? And it's going to take, a variety of different approaches to see that reduction.
Well, this is also true that so much violence is domestic, that it is committed between people who know each other. The random stranger is so much a smaller percentage of these things. What do you think of arming schools and teachers?
So we do not support guns in schools at all. And That's for a variety of reasons. One is that if you look at police and their ability to shoot a moving target, it's usually around 30% success rate. And those are highly trained officers who do this for a living. So the idea that we're going to turn teachers into sharpshooters is pretty absurd. And there's much more risk of keeping a loaded gun in the classroom. Teachers overwhelmingly do not want to be armed. In addition, it puts marginalized kids at risk. When we look at race issues in schools, they're much more likely to be disciplined. So it's just, it creates many more issues than it solves. And I just want to be clear that the reason that the gun lobby is so intent right now and for the last couple of years in arming teachers is because they have a $100 million shortfall based on the fact that Donald Trump was elected. They don't have anyone to gin up sales after a mass shooting like they did, the last 8 years or so. And so they want to arm just a fraction of America's 3.6 million teachers in order to make back that money. It's the same reason they're trying to deregulate silencers. And there's absolutely no data that shows arming teachers would be effective. Teachers don't want to be armed, and police also do not support arming teachers.
If I were a teacher, I wouldn't want the temptation.
Yeah. You just bugged me.
Buggers. Exactly. Yeah. I said, get your homework in now.
I want to go, okay, my next question is about the gun lobby, but to your point about sharpshooting, a very old family friend of ours, his father was a cop, an Irish cop in Brooklyn. And he said, like, he was a cop for like 40 years. And the only time he ever had to draw his service revolver was when a rabid dog came charging at him, and he missed.
Oh, my gosh.
But that's the point, right? It's not easy to be a highly trained person who is going to be able to deal with these. But I want to go to your point about the gun lobby. I mean, I don't want to sound biased, but why is it so evil? Why does it seem to support everything that is terrifying and horrible?
Constitutional rights aren't terrifying.
No, but bumper stock, come on. The Constitution says nothing about semi-automatics, bumper stocks, all these things. It's mentally ill people owning rights.
No,
They're
of course,
against everything.
Right.
They're against everything.
I'm no fan. I have no truck with the NRA. I'm not a gun owner or anything. But I am very alive to this constitutional question.
It's Shannon, you answer.
Let me just say, like, people who say, no, we just, of course it's in the Constitution, but we're just going to attenuate your right. And, the alert, vigilant, non-armed American would say, okay, that's fine. And what other constitutional rights would you like to attenuate?
Oh, it's okay, Shannon, you go, girl. Shannon, go, girl. Go, Shannon.
Look, it is the leadership of the NRA that has become so radicalized over the last decade. And that is because they see the future, and the future demographic is not in their favor. This is not about the NRA members. It is about the leadership who realized that in order to sell guns at the same rate they have been, they would have to go to the right. They're being pulled to the right also by every state mini NRA that's even more radical than they are. And that is why, for example, you see them trying to pass laws that force guns onto college campuses, because the only way to sell guns to this next generation is to inculcate them and have them be everywhere. It's why they also want to put guns in schools. It's why they've passed something called permitless carry in 13 states. This is about greedy gun lobbyists who are not trying to defend the Second Amendment, from this mythical force that is trying to ban all guns, which is not happening. But it is really just about forcing guns everywhere. And it is why we have such a gun violence crisis.
Mm-hmm. I was struck by one of the surveys I came across, which is very heartbreaking. Like, as you say, it's the younger generation that seems to be taking a much firmer stance against guns and for gun control. And there was one survey, this came from University of Michigan. It said, how worried, if at all, are you about a shooting at your school? And 25% of teenagers said very, and 32% said somewhat.
Oh, God, that's
so it means, this has now entered our psyche, that our teenagers, aside from their homework and everything else they worry about.
Yeah, generation lockdown.
Yeah.
No, that's really it's very interesting, your analysis of the NRA, Shannon. It's very it's astute, and it sounds it passes the smell test, doesn't it?
Quick wrap up, because I know you have to go. What do you want to see happen in this election? I know your website offers, like, you can just enter your zip code and then find the candidates who are what you call for common sense gun control. So tell us, what would you like to see happen on this issue?
So this year was the first year we gave out something called the Gun Sense Distinction, and that's really just to candidates who fill out a questionnaire and support the initiatives we've been talking about during this call, right? Background checks, red flag laws, disarming domestic abusers, banning bump stocks. And we thought, since it's the first year we're doing this, we thought, okay, we'll give out a couple hundred. In fact, we've given out over 3,000 to Republicans and Democrats alike in red, blue, and purple states. And I think that's just more proof that not only are politicians not running away from this issue, they realize they can run on it and that they will be supported. And so we're very hopeful that we will have a successful win rate and that we will put people in office, Republicans and Democrats alike, who will act on this and start to change the makeup of Congress so that we can, instead of having this patchwork of state laws across the country, that we can pass some comprehensive federal laws that we know save lives.
You know, it's interesting because I know with some of the other big social sort of adaptations that have taken place, like drunk driving and smoking being two of the most significant in the last 100 years. One of the characteristics of those movements was a feeling of sort of national understanding. We have a problem, you know? And I think it's entirely likely that we are at that point and that you will start to see some of these things shifting because of that reason, because it actually this just gone on like the numbers of people who were killed in car accidents, like the numbers of people coughing out their lungs. You know, it's a problem. We're maybe as a country moving to the point where we're ready to do something. I mean, I don't know what form it will take, but you can sort of feel that.
Right. Well,
yeah.
and not least thanks to you, Shannon. Thank you for coming on. Shannon Watts is founder of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America. Where can everybody find you, Shannon?
You can go to momsdemandaction.org or @momsdemand on Twitter. And we also have a Facebook page for every single state, and you can see what's happening near you locally. And one other way to get involved is to text the word JOIN to 64433.
Okay, and can I ask you a very frivolous question now?
Yes.
We got through the serious
stuff. Is it beauty tips?
What?
No, it's not beauty tips. It's, what's your favorite cocktail? Because
my favorite cocktail?
Very important to us, yes.
Obviously a Moscow Mule in a copper cup.
Why a Moscow Mule?
Why, obviously?
They're delicious.
They're delicious. I don't see how this goes along on the gun theme unless,
It has a real kick.
I know. I don't know of a gun-themed cocktail, but I'll tell you what. I do love a good Moscow Mule.
Okay. Well, in your honor, Shannon, that will be the cocktail of the week for you. But
excellent.
I'm with Shannon on that one. Moscow Mule.
This is Zoe.
There's a fall Moscow Mule recipe that I just saw that has hard
it's got
cider
apple
in
cider.
it. It has cider in it.
Okay.
I'll have to send it to you.
So Zoe is posting this week's cocktail, obviously. All right. And thank you. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So great to talk to you.
Yeah, delightful to talk to you, Shannon. Take care.
And say hi to David. I love him.
We all love David.
We all love David. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
When I grew up, I called him mine. He would always laugh and say, remember when we used to play bang, bang. I shot you down, bang, bang. You hit the ground, bang, bang. That awful sound, bang, bang. I used to shoot you down.
All right. So Meghan, you came into that a little more inclined to be in a good way, combative, like
A little
questioning.
skeptical, maybe.
Skeptical,
A little
skeptical.
yeah.
And so what was your takeaway?
Well, I was very impressed. I thought she's obviously an extremely articulate person and very interesting points that she made. I mean, it's also kind of an honor to be talking to the Carrie Nation of the gun movement. Right? Although she's not, I think, taking an axe to anybody. But no, I mean, I think it's a very, very interesting and astute approach to try to nudge the culture in a social way. Mm-hmm. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, God knows we need fewer mass shootings.
And it's also, when you look at mass shootings, honestly, they are as spectacular as they are, as statistics, they're like the least of our problems, although, of course, they're horrific.
Yeah.
It really is domestic suicides that you're more...
Suicides, 2/3 of the gun violence, as it were, is self-inflicted.
Right. So the very fact that you have these guns handy just makes things... I mean, I think you know this about me, Meghan, but I've been mugged 3 times, I think.
Wow.
I've been
and
like,
also
I'm a mugger's... I'm just
You're
like a mugger's mug. I mean, they just love me, muggers. No, I've had someone threaten me with a Coke bottle. Okay, that doesn't sound very dramatic, but it was scary.
I will hit you with
He said, he walked up to me and he said,
I'll
I'll
get you.
smash my face with it. He was high.
Oh,
and then I had a person in Brooklyn with a balaclava. I want to call them baklavas. But
Yeah, I know, but that's also a method of torment. You will eat this and you will eat it now.
You'll give me a wallet, I hit you with the baklava.
Or I
Anyway.
feed it to you layer by layer.
But I had somebody come run at me in Brooklyn years ago and with a screwdriver. Came like running at me, suddenly in my visual, suddenly gone. I just threw my purse down. And then another thing on a subway incident. They seemed to love me. But the point was, had I had a gun, would the right thing have been to shot these guys dead? I mean, the first guy was a kind of pathetic. I mean, I got, except for the guy, the screwdriver, who had the mugging down to an art. I got the others were caught.
No, I don't know.
And I don't think shooting them dead would have been the...
No, although I think that people who are in favor of gun ownership would tell you that there's a great deal of deterrence that can result long before you actually even consider pulling the trigger. I mean, a gun has a way of sobering people up pretty fast. It's why when someone produces one, people get out of their car and they allow themselves to be carjacked. You wouldn't normally get out of a car and just give it to someone, but if that person produces a gun, I mean, they can be extremely effective devices for persuasion. And I don't see why that wouldn't work.
But would I have been so quick that I just would have shot these people? Like, I don't like to think that I would have done that. Well, the grandfather I talked to you about, he kept a rifle in his house, and he would instruct my grandmother, my step-grandmother, on what to do if an intruder came in. So they had a shotgun. And by the way, I think shotguns are more women's friends because you just have to stand at the top of a staircase. And
it has the deterrent effect.
It has the big clip. Like this idea that I'm going to pull out a Glock and, shoot an intruder seems a bit silly. But anyway, so he had a shotgun and he would start telling her what to do. So he said, okay, so you're in the bedroom. You're alone. Do you hear an intruder? So you go into the corner of the room and you sit in the chair and you get the gun ready. And you wait for the intruder to come into your room, and then you
give it to him hard and fast.
But as he was saying, of course, it never happened, ever. No. But as he would say this, he would get so excited at the prospect, and then you could see him like frustrated that this, in fact, was not going to happen.
She didn't have the opportunity to defend herself and her honor and the family.
Exactly. There's something a little weird about this. I mean, I know someone who drives up, we drive to Canada every year. They do like a similar drive through upstate New York, and they have a Glock in their car.
A lot of meth heads in upstate New York. You got to be careful.
I don't know. And he takes it out at service stations, and you think, are you, I mean, is this romanticizing our danger? I mean, I live in the district. I mean, I don't want to, jinx myself, but I don't feel the need to have a gun in my house. And let alone on a car trip to Canada, do I need a Glock in my glove compartment? That there's also something kind of weirdly sick about people who are feeling themselves that much in danger.
I don't think I would characterize it that way. Look, people have their subjective experiences of life. And I mean, you having been menaced so many times by lunatics and dangerous malefactors, you, in some ways, one would expect you to say, in fact, it would be extremely consoling to have some kind of weapon to display the next time somebody rushes at me with a weapon.
I just gave him my purse and it was done. I menaced someone. Someone who menaced me on a subway.
You menaced them back?
Well, no, it was actually really interesting. I was on the subway. This was in Toronto, so smuggery gone, because this does happen in Canada. We're not just eating maple syrup. I was on the subway at rush hour, very, very crowded. And a man got on, and he was this big man with boxes. He was obviously quite crazy. But he got on and he began hitting people with these boxes. And then he sat down. He was horrible. He was obnoxious and, bad-mannered, which really doesn't go over well in Toronto.
Mental illness is one thing, but bad manners is not acceptable.
Not in Toronto.
No.
And he then sat down on a woman. He just sat down on the subway. And I do have a little bit of a vigilante streak in me, I'm not going to lie.
Oh, I've seen
And I got up and I walked to him while he was sitting on this woman. And I said, "You, sir, have to stand up. This is not acceptable, what you are doing." And he stood up. He was a huge man. And he drew back his fist. And the whole subway car went, and then 2 men dove on him from behind.
Nice.
One of them
that is awesome masculinity.
was a priest.
They're men too.
And anyway, grabbed him. The emergency strip was pressed, and police came because it's Canada. They rove on horseback.
Hello, I'm here to help.
The Mounties. Anyway, I went to court, and he had skipped the country, so there was no justice done. But anyway, but the point was, I take your point. When things happen suddenly, it's very difficult for anybody to have the presence of mind, if they are armed, to pull it out and be effective with it. Right. At the same time, I think it's a tricky thing. It's like who are you have your life experience and your conclusions. Right.
I'm going to go back to the idea that it's sick to want to have a weapon. Doesn't strike me as sick. I don't have one myself.
Have you ever wanted one?
Oh, I have. Sure.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
No, I've thought about it. I've thought about it. I've thought about it when we had some trouble with teenagers in our family, and
you wanted to shoot your child. You wanted
my own children never, but other people's children once or twice. Like that old joke about marriage,
This is the last time you will leave goldfish on the floor of my minivan.
Put the puzzle pieces in the puzzle box
right now.
No, there's that old joke about. In fact, I think this joke was told at our wedding, if I remember correctly, about an old couple who've been married for 50, 60 years, and they're asked, how did you do it? 50 years together. Did you ever think about divorce? And the woman said, divorce? Never. Murder?
All the time. Well, I have to admit, I love shooting. I've gone to shooting range. If I can brag a little, I'm a kind of a good shot. Apparently, women are famously great sharpshooters.
This is why, I think take them out of the infantry, put them in sharpshooting units.
Right,
That's what we need
snipers.
To do with women, so they don't have to all break snipers. Their ACLs when they're doing the same PT as men.
But that being said, I'd rather do it in a range. I would find it very weird to have a gun in my home. But then urbanites, as we are, we're the least likely. Funnily enough, despite urban crime, we're the least likely to own weapons.
Interesting. Maybe it's because we live in such densely populated areas that the police can get to us quickly, unlike the secluded farm of, say, the Clutter family.
Oh, God.
Just saying. There are reasons that people want to be armed, and sometimes they're good.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then you can also say, get a dog.
If they had our golden doodle, I would be another victim. Oh, hello. You seem nice. Oh, and you seem nice also. Come on in.
Yeah, that is a bit of a problem. I agree.
I feel like Christina's dog would be a great guard dog.
Oh,
feel like Izzy.
Okay, Christina's not even here. We're bringing up Izzy. I got a note from someone who said, Christina talks about Izzy too much.
Oh, join the club of objectors. If I hear about Izzy one more time, no offense, Christina, I love Izzy. I love her so much, but it's a little like somebody talking about their child in the 3rd grade who's an honor student.
Izzy, but to be fair to Christina, Izzy is no honor student.
No, Izzy is the bad girl.
Izzy's such a bad girl. Anyway, all right, Meghan. Thank you for being here.
Lovely to explain
Thank
with
you
you.
for explaining, co-splaining. You are the best.
My pleasure. And
really I think we hope Christina will be back next week.
Otherwise,
Otherwise, you'll be here again. All right, thank you.
Yeah,
and
great.
See you, femsplainer.